The James Webb Space Telescope was designed as an instrument of pure measurement, built to capture infrared data from the beginning of time. Yet, when the first images arrived, scientists did not just publish spreadsheets of light frequencies. They published breathtaking, vibrant pictures of nebulas and galaxies that looked like cosmic paintings. The data was transformed into an experience. This brings us directly to a radical philosophical claim: the idea that the highest function of human knowledge is not merely to map intellectual truth, but to guide natural materials toward aesthetic realization. We are going to examine the premise that our ultimate purpose is not just to know the world, but to shape the raw stuff of the universe into something deeply meaningful and experientially complete. Miles, our post-Enlightenment world treats knowledge as a mirror, designed to reflect reality perfectly. This claim treats knowledge as a chisel. It completely inverts the hierarchy of how we value information.
It does invert that hierarchy, Malik. When you look at the dominant framework of the last few centuries, intellectual truth is the apex of human achievement. We're taught that discovering a universal law of physics or mapping the human genome is the end goal. Applying that knowledge is often seen as secondary, a mere byproduct of the pure science. The claim we are examining suggests that uncovering the facts of the natural world is just the prerequisite. The true zenith of that knowledge is reached only when those facts are synthesized with natural materials to create a profound aesthetic experience. It suggests that the universe does not just want to be understood, it wants to be expressed.
Let us ground this historically, because this is not a completely new way of looking at the world. Before the scientific revolution, the division between art, craft, and science was far less rigid.
The ancient Greeks did not even have separate words for art and technology in the way we do. They used the word techne, which referred to both the craftsmanship of a carpenter and the art of a sculptor. The philosopher Aristotle wrote extensively about a concept called poiesis, which translates roughly to bringing forth. For the Greeks, techne was the process of using knowledge to bring something out of concealment and into presence. It was about taking raw natural materials like marble, wood, or bronze and working with their inherent qualities to reveal their potential.
Martin Heidegger picked up on this exact distinction in the 20th century, specifically in his essay, The Question Concerning Technology. Heidegger drew a sharp line between that ancient concept of poiesis and the modern technological mindset. He argued that modern science and technology view nature as what he called a standing reserve. In that framework, a river is no longer a natural wonder, it is just a potential source of hydroelectric power. A forest is just a stockpile of timber. The intellectual truth of modern science, according to Heidegger, often reduces the world to a spreadsheet of exploitable energy.
That is the core tension here. Heidegger warned that our obsession with calculable, instrumental truth traps us in a mode of thinking where everything is just a resource. He contrasted that with the older view where knowledge was used to bring forth the true into the beautiful. When a craftsman built a bridge in the pre-industrial world, they had to understand the stone in the river working in harmony with the natural materials rather than simply dominating them. The knowledge was employed to achieve a state of aesthetic realization, where the finished object felt like a natural extension of the landscape.
I want to challenge the premise slightly. If we say aesthetic realization is the highest function, someone might argue we are dismissing pure intellectual truth as inferior. You cannot build the James Webb Telescope or a Gothic cathedral without a rigorous mathematical understanding of physics and engineering. The intellectual truth must come first, or the cathedral collapses. Does this claim risk turning science into a mere servant of art?
It does not diminish the necessity of science, but it recontextualizes its ultimate purpose. Think of the philosopher John Dewey. In his 1934 book, Art as Experience, Dewey laid out a pragmatic approach to aesthetics. He argued against the idea that art is something you just put in a museum, separate from ordinary life. For Dewey, an aesthetic experience occurs when the interaction between a human being and their environment reaches a stage of fulfillment. It is a moment where means and ends coalesce.
Break down that phrase, where means and ends coalesce. What does that look like in practice? When you are just seeking intellectual truth or utilitarian function, the means are strictly mechanical steps to reach an end. You drive to the store just to get groceries. The drive itself is not the point. But in an aesthetic experience, the process and the result are unified. Take Japanese wood joinery. The craftsmen possess an encyclopedic knowledge of wood biology, understanding exactly how different species expand, contract, and hold moisture. That is rigorous intellectual truth, but the end result is a structure built without a single nail, where the interlocking joints are so precise they become a visual masterpiece. The scientific knowledge of the wood is fully realized in the aesthetic beauty of the architecture. The intellectual truth is the invisible scaffolding, and the aesthetic realization is the building we actually live in. I see how this plays out in acoustics, too. Look at the Stradivarius violins, crafted in the 17th and 18th centuries. Antonio Stradivari possessed a profound empirical knowledge of maple and spruce, of varnishes and geometry. Modern acoustical physicists have spent decades mapping the resonant frequencies of those instruments, achieving a highly detailed intellectual truth about how they work. But the scientific data does not move a concert hall to tears. The aesthetic realization, the sound produced when horsehair meets catgut and vibrates through that specific wood, is the ultimate manifestation of Stradivari's knowledge.
That is a perfect illustration. If the highest function of knowledge were merely intellectual truth, then a computer model detailing the acoustic properties of a Stradivarius would be the pinnacle of human achievement regarding that instrument. But nobody listens to a computer model. The model is abstract. The violin is concrete. Dewey emphasized that humans are fundamentally tied to their natural environment, and our highest experiences are formed through our interaction with the physical world. Aesthetic realization is the process of taking the abstract concepts of our minds and embedding them into the natural materials of the earth, creating something that resonates on a sensory and emotional level.
There is a potential dark side to this hierarchy, though. If we elevate aesthetic realization above intellectual truth, we open the door to some dangerous historical precedents. The philosopher Walter Benjamin famously analyzed how fascism relied on the aestheticization of politics. Totalitarian regimes often use grand, sweeping aesthetics, massive rallies, dramatic architecture, cinematic propaganda to bypass intellectual truth entirely. They create a powerful sensory experience that manipulates the public while obscuring the horrific reality of their actions. If aesthetics is the highest function, how do we prevent it from being used as a weapon against truth?
That is the most significant vulnerability of this philosophical framework. Benjamin's critique is essential because it shows what happens when aesthetic realization is divorced from a foundation of rigorous ethical truth. Fascism did not use knowledge to guide natural materials toward beauty. It used manipulation to guide human emotions toward destruction. For the claim we are analyzing to hold up, the aesthetic realization cannot be a deception. It must be a genuine expression of the underlying truth. The beauty of the James Webb images is profound precisely because it is an accurate representation of the cosmos, not a fabricated painting.
The aesthetic must be the blossoming of the truth, not a mask covering a lie. This requires a synthesis. The intellectual truth acts as the anchor, preventing the aesthetic from drifting into illusion or manipulation.
Exactly. When Heidegger talked about revealing, he meant that the technology or the art must uncover something real about the world. If it obscures reality, it fails. The architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, who was heavily influenced by the same pragmatic currents as John Dewey, designed his buildings to be extensions of the natural landscape. His prairie-style architecture relied on the immense structural engineering knowledge, but the goal was to create an environment that fostered a deep, harmonious experience for the people living inside. The engineering was honest. It did not hide the nature of the materials, but celebrated them.
It changes how we view education and progress. Currently, we categorize disciplines very rigidly. Science is over here, tasked with discovering facts. Art is over there, tasked with making things look nice. We treat the aesthetic component as a luxury, a coat of paint applied after the real work of engineering is done. But if we accept that knowledge's highest function is aesthetic realization, then a biologist studying cellular structures and a painter mixing pigments are participating in the same grand project.
They're two halves of the same process. And we are starting to see this synthesis emerge in fields like biomimicry and sustainable design. Engineers are no longer just looking at how to extract resources from nature. They're studying the microscopic structure of a lotus leaf to design self-cleaning surfaces, or the aerodynamics of a kingfisher's beak to build quieter bullet trains. They're taking the intellectual truth of evolutionary biology and using it to guide synthetic and natural materials toward forms that are not only highly functional, but inherently elegant.
That brings us back to the idea of the standing reserve. If we view nature purely as a stockpile of resources to be consumed, we inevitably destroy the environment. The pursuit of endless intellectual truth and technological dominance without an aesthetic or experiential goal leads to strip mines and polluted oceans. But if our highest aim is aesthetic realization, our relationship with natural materials has to change. You cannot achieve a profound aesthetic experience if you have poisoned the environment you rely on.
The framework demands respect for the materials. A sculptor cannot force stone to do something it is not structurally capable of doing without breaking it. You have to understand the fault lines and the density. In the same way, if our goal as a species is to shape our world into a place of lived beauty and meaning, we have to deeply understand the ecological limits of the planet. The intellectual truth of climate science or ecology is the prerequisite knowledge we need, but the aesthetic realization is building a society that actually thrives within those limits, creating cities and technologies that integrate seamlessly with the natural world.
It transforms the concept of knowledge from a tool of conquest into a tool of collaboration. We are not just cataloging the universe to assert dominance over it. We are gathering knowledge so that we can participate in the ongoing creation of the world. It is a shift from dissecting the frog to building the pond.
And that synthesis is what makes the human experience unique. We have the capacity for abstract, analytical thought, but we also have sensory bodies that crave beauty, rhythm, and connection. John Dewey believed that art was the most universal form of language because it speaks directly to that shared physical and emotional reality. When knowledge remains purely intellectual, it stays locked in the minds of a few experts. When it is translated into an aesthetic form, it becomes accessible to everyone. It becomes part of the culture.
That is a powerful place to land. The pursuit of intellectual truth gives us the vocabulary, but aesthetic realization is the poetry we write with it. We move from mapping the mechanics of the universe to finding our place within its beauty. If this exploration of knowledge and aesthetics shifted your perspective today, pass this episode along to a friend who might appreciate the conversation.